Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if there is a special way to talk to someone learning a new language that makes it much easier for them to pick things up? Well, this new study dives deep into just that, exploring whether talking like you are speaking to a baby could actually help adults learn a new language faster. Most of us have probably experienced the frustration of trying to learn a new language. It is tough, right? Especially when you are just starting out and everything sounds like a jumbled mess. This research explores how we can help these beginners, these AB initio learners, get a handle on new words when they first hear them in continuous speech. One of the key ideas is whether a specific way of talking called infant, directed speech, or baby talk can lend a hand. You know, that way we often talk to babies with a higher pitch, slower pace, and exaggerated sounds. Scientists think this might make it easier for babies to learn language, but could it also help adults learn a new language when they're total beginners? That's the big question here. The researchers wanted to see if adults who were just starting to learn a language, like German for English speakers, could recognize words better if they heard them spoken in an infant-directed style compared to normal adult speech. They had a theory that the special features of baby talk, like clearer pronunciation and more distinct intonation, might help these new learners segment the speech stream into individual words. Think about it like this. Your brain is trying to find the little puzzle pieces of words in a long, unbroken stream of sound. They hypothesized that baby talk might make those pieces stand out more. To test this idea, they designed a series of experiments. In the first experiment, they had English speakers listen to German sentences. Some heard these sentences in a normal adult tone, and others heard them in a baby talk style. The goal was to see if hearing German as a baby would. After listening, they tested the participants to see if they could remember or recognize words they had heard. They used the method where participants had to indicate whether they heard a specific word during the listening phase. Now, the details of how they did this are pretty involved, but basically participants listened to lots of German sentences. Then, in a test phase, they were presented with individual words and had to say if they remembered hearing them. They compared how well people performed based on whether they heard IDs, which is infant-directed speech, or ADS, which is adult-directed speech. They also looked at things like how often a word was heard and how long the word was, to see if those things made a difference too. What did they find? Well, it turns out that the way they spoke did have an effect. In experiment 1, they saw some evidence that the infant-directed speech helped. Specifically, it seemed to be most helpful for words that were heard multiple times during the listening phase. And in particular, for longer words, these are called bisyllabic words. This suggested that baby talk might indeed be a bit of a language learning superpower, even for adults. However, they also noted that the overall performance in this first experiment wasn't super high. They figured that maybe having to remember a lot of sounds for a long time before being tested was making the task too difficult. It's like trying to recall a whole conversation you just had versus just remembering the last sentence you heard. So, they decided to adjust their approach for the next experiment. In experiment 2, they changed the game. Instead of having participants listen for a while and then get tested, they presented a sentence and immediately followed it with a test word. Participants then had to decide right away if that word was in the sentence they just heard. This significantly lowered the memory load, meaning participants didn't have to hold on to so many sounds for so long. And guess what? This change made a big difference. When the task was made easier, they found much clearer evidence that infant-directed speech helped. Participants recognized words better when they had heard the preceding sentences spoken in IDs compared to ADS. This strongly suggests that the way the speech is delivered, using an infant-directed style, really does give a boost to language processing, especially when the memory demands are reduced. They also found that longer words, the bisyllabic ones, were still easier to recognize, which was consistent with the first experiment. This is crucial because it helps pinpoint when infant-directed speech is most helpful. It seems to aid directly in the processing and storing of continuous speech, which is a fundamental step in learning a new language. The fact that they found this advantage even without any visual cues or object associations, purely based on auditory input, highlights the power of the speech style itself. Moody to now, you might be thinking, does it always work? Or maybe the online testing in experiment 2 was just different. To really nail this down, they did a third experiment to Moody Tune. Experiment 3 essentially brought back the longer listening phase from experiment 1, but used the online testing setup from experiment 2. This was to see if the results from experiment 1 were just a fluke because of the testing method or the specific participants. Interestingly, experiment 3 largely mirrored the pattern seen in experiment 1. They found some evidence that IDs was helpful, particularly for frequently heard words. However, like in experiment 1, the overall recognition was not as strong as in experiment 2 and the D scores. which measure how well people can distinguish between words they heard and those they didn't, were still quite low. This reinforces the idea that the memory demands of the task are a significant factor. So, what's the big takeaway from all of this? Across the 3 experiments, the researchers found that adult beginners learning a new language do benefit from hearing speech in an infant-directed register. This means that special way of talking, with its exaggerated pitch and clearer pronunciation, can indeed make it easier to pick out words from a stream of unfamiliar sounds. This was most apparent when the task didn't overload the participants' memory. They also confirmed that hearing words more often is better for learning. And interestingly, longer bisyllabic words seem to be a bit easier to recognize than shorter monosyllabic ones. This goes against the idea that learners would just revert to patterns from their native language, like English, where shorter words are more common. The most significant finding, however, revolves around the task itself. When participants had to remember sounds for a long time, their performance suffered, but when the test came immediately after hearing the sentence, their ability to recognize words improved dramatically. This highlights how working memory plays a huge role in early language learning. It is not just about the input, but also about how much the learner has to juggle in their mind at any given moment. This research suggests that using an infant-directed speech style might be a really useful tool in language learning environments for adults who are just starting out. It's not a magic bullet, and the challenging tasks can mask its benefits, but the underlying pattern is clear. The exaggerated prosody and perhaps the increased attention it draws can help learners segment and process new language. This is super interesting because it means that even without visual cues or associating words with objects, this particular way of speaking can prime the brain for learning. It makes you wonder about the kind of input received in language classes, or from language exchange partners. Could intentionally using a slightly more exaggerated, clearer style, inspired by baby talk, help new learners grasp the language faster? Of course. Every study has its limits. They controlled for speaking rate, but they couldn't perfectly match every single acoustic feature. And the context of the sentences themselves might have played a role. Plus, the idea of forerunner, directed speech, where native speakers simplify their language for learners, is also out there and might have similar effects. But overall, this study gives us a fascinating glimpse into how the way we speak can profoundly impact how easily someone can learn a new language. It's a reminder that sometimes going back to basics, like the way we talk to infants, can unlock surprising learning potential. What do you think? Have you ever noticed yourself changing how you speak when someone is learning your language? Let me know in the comments below if you enjoyed this dive into language learning research. Please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more incredible science stories, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.